Welcome to Keith's Off-Grid Camper Adventure. Hi there, my name is David and I'm from suburban Chicago, and this here is my brother Keith. He now lives in the middle of nowhere in a camper off-grid with no electricity, no heat, and no running water for a bathroom or a shower. Keith was given the opportunity to go off-grid and he took it. So he bought a 35-foot camper and he parked it here in the middle of prairie grass by some trees on a hillside. Now he knows nothing about living off-grid or about owning a camper, and neither do I for that matter. But he was convinced that with our combined critical thinking skills that we could figure it out. Well, okay, maybe, but it's September and winter is coming. So we have to move fast if he is going to survive a Vermont winter. Vermont winters are comprised of sub-zero temperatures, super chilly, cold winds, and snowfalls of up to 12 inches at a time, multiple times throughout the winter season. Our adventure is preparing for, and then hopefully Keith surviving, a cold winter in a camper off-grid in Vermont. I'll be on-grid in my suburban home in Chicago, but he'll be in the elements. So join us on this adventure by hitting the subscribe button and following along as we adjust and prepare for making it through a winter in Vermont. I promise that our journey will not only be all the good decisions we make, but that it'll reflect those decisions we made that maybe didn't quite turn out the way we had hoped. Our hope, though, is that this journey will be entertaining, interesting, and at least a little bit educational. So again, hit the subscribe button and join us on this adventure because, well, here we go. We'll be tackling the three main obstacles that we face as we go into a cold winter here in Vermont. Number one is electricity, because there is no electricity when you're off-grid. Number two is heat, because if you don't generate it, there is no heat. And then number three is just water and a bathroom, because the occasional tree is okay, but that doesn't solve your problems. Our topic for this video is going to focus mostly on solar. But before we launch into all of that, I just want to give you a little bit of an idea of why did we end up here? Why is Keith going off-grid? And it just so happened that being an outdoor recreation major kind of guy, that he found himself in a conversation with a complete stranger in regards to this person's property, which was boarding next to a public park. And he had a tremendous issue with trespassing, even though he had cameras and he had signs and he even had a fence. But people took liberties to just go onto his property and explore and create paths and be there. And so he just casually mentioned that if he had a human presence on his property, he feels that that would deter people from trespassing. And it just so happened that at the end of this really spontaneous conversation that the gentleman said, if by any chance you want to put a camper on my property, that would be awesome. And so Keith brought this conversation back to me on the phone, and I thought it was interesting, but I also was a little suspicious. So I asked him to just go back and confirm this. And so he did. He called this gentleman up and he met him at the property, and they shook hands on a deal that if Keith put a camper off-grid on his property, that he could stay there absolutely free of charge. And so on a handshake, we moved forward with that idea. And what happened is that I ended up going on Facebook Marketplace from Illinois shopping for a camper in Vermont. And I found one about 90 minutes away from where Keith was staying. And so he went to the bank, got a check, drove all the way down there, met the person, and she walked him through everything in the camper. Everything worked. Lights, stove, heating, air conditioning, all of the components. It was just a life situation for this couple where their kids had obviously grown up and this camper didn't serve a purpose anymore in the season of life that they were. So they just wanted to unload it and get it out of there. So Keith verified everything, felt comfortable with what the camper was worth and the condition it was in, and so they unplugged and unhooked everything. He hitched it to the back of his pickup truck and he drove off. And this is what his camper looks like. This is him 1 mile away from where he picked it up. And as you see, it's 35 feet long. It is a very large camper. Now he paid $8,500 for this camper, even though it had a street value of $13,500. So the first thing he did was he drove it to Burlington, Vermont, where his daughter lives, and he parked it in her driveway. And she, being a natural clean bug and pregnant at the time, so she had a little nesting instinct going, they went at it to clean it. And you can see here on the inside where they're cleaning absolutely everything. The cushions, the curtains, the carpet, the countertops, the closet, the fridge, everything in this camper is being cleaned. Keith focused mostly on the outside and on the top of the camper. It took them a full day to clean it. And you can see the stuff here drying on the outside of the camper in the sun. And a camper is kind of like a tiny house where, you know, you have all these nooks and crannies and you can hide things in it. And these people had had this camper for 12 years. And so Keith and his daughter ended up with a whole pickup truck full of stuff that they drove to a waste recycling kind of facility, and for $38 they never saw any of that stuff again. And then he came back and he hitched that clean trailer to his truck again, and he hauled it and he parked it right here to its current semi-permanent location on a hillside by a row of trees in the middle of prairie grass. And so there he was, very happy, his first night off-grid, and he watches the sunset, and it's all beautiful, and then he walks in his camper and he flicks a light switch, and nothing, absolutely nothing turns on, nothing works, and it's pitch black because he's in the middle of nowhere. There is no residual light from anything. And so he does the only thing he can do, the only thing he's left to do. He goes to bed because he has no options. He gets up in the morning and a little bit before the sunrise, and so he sits at his computer and he's working, and he notices that his coffee inside of his cup is a little bit slanted, and he notices that his pen keeps running off the table. So he realizes that his camper isn't level. So he goes outside and he tries to get the camper to level, but again, there's no electricity. So what was powered when he picked it up is not powered. So he has to manually crank it, and he's able with the leveler and different things to get it somewhat level. But he is puzzled by this thing, and he's not feeling good about his camper because he's got no power. So he calls me, and it was quite early, and then he asked me, what do I do? There's absolutely no power. So with a little bit of brainstorming, we figure there must be a battery somewhere. And so we hunt, and we do, of course, find one on the front frame where the hitch is. And he pops this little black lid off of this little black box, and sure enough, there's what looks like a car battery inside. And so he asked me, well, how do I test it? And I'm like, buddy, I don't think you need to test it. I think it told you everything you need to know. Let's pop that sucker out of there. And you're going to drive back into civilization, go to an auto parts store and have them test it, see if this thing has any life in it. So he does just that, and he puts it on the counter, and they do some stress tests, and they're like, wow, not much going on here. Leave it with us for a couple hours, and then come back, and we'll see if it takes a charge. So he does that. He comes back, and they're just like, boy, I don't know where you got this battery, but it has absolutely no life to it. And so eventually we figure out that it was the original battery from the camper. It was probably 12 years old. The guy behind the counter didn't even recognize the brand name on the battery. So he ends up buying 2 more comparable batteries that looked exactly the same, had the same ratings and stuff, and he gets some connecting cables, and he spends about $300 on 2 batteries, and he leaves that store drives over to a store called Harbor Freight where he buys a solar panel kit. And then he drives back to his camper. And then here you see he installed his 2 batteries and he connected them in parallel because that maintains a 12-volt system. And then he assembled his solar panel. They came in 4 individual things, and he just screws them together. And then he took the wires, put them in a controller, which is important because that regulates how much electricity goes to your batteries when it needs it, and then it turns it off so that your batteries don't get overcharged. So he hooks it up to his batteries, he connects the batteries back to the camper, and wow, all of a sudden the controller turns on and it tells him you are charging, and he's excited about this. So he realizes all of a sudden that his camper is on. So he walks into his camper and he flicks the light switch, and sure enough the lights come on. And he walks everywhere and he turns on every light switch, and every light switch works. So he's ecstatic about this. But then he hears a noise. He's wondering, well, what's this noise? He walks back and all of a sudden he realizes his fridge turned on. So he opens his fridge, the light is on, the fridge is cooling, everything is good. He's feeling really good about this. So that was exciting. And so for about $500, $300 on the batteries, $200 on the solar panel, he suddenly has electricity and he's excited. One of the things that we wanted to tackle right away once we got the 12-volt system up with these 2 batteries was light bulbs, because what he noticed was that even though he had light bulbs and they provided light, it was really dim in there, and he could turn on 3, 4, 5 lights and he still could not even read a book. So it was enough light for him to see. It wasn't dark, but it wasn't enough light for him to actually do any kind of reading or work. And so right away, we decided that we should switch out the bulbs that he has in his lights for LED bulbs. And it just so happened that he has 23 bulbs in this camper. So he went back into civilization, tried to find a bulb that was comparable than what he had, and they were about $10 a piece. So he was a little discouraged by that, but he sent me a picture, and this is what an original bulb looks like that came out of his camper. And these are 12-volt bulbs. I ended up finding some on the internet. We bought them in bulk, and instead of $10 a piece, they were $1.40, so we bought a batch of about 30 of these. Now there are 2 different kinds of bulbs, but here, this shows you what the LED bulb looks like when it turns on. And it's super bright. You can see the iris of the camera adjusting. And so this is what the bulb looked like. This is what the LED of it looks like. And then he had these other bulbs that you see here. These were in his dining room, and we found out that these were actually 110-volt bulbs. And so you can see the LED version of those are a little bit different. They're bizarre looking, but here again, this is what the bulb looks like when it's installed, and then this is what it looks like when it turns on. Once we replaced all of these bulbs, and they were inside the camper and outside the camper, I wanted to do a stress test because I wanted to see how much juice these bulbs used. And so we did just that. So at 6 p.m., I had him turn on all 23 bulbs, the fridge was going, and we did this for 6 hours. So for 6 hours, everything was on. I mean, he glow in the dark light bulb in the middle of the forest is what it looked like. But at the end of that, we measured how much electricity it used, and it was really negligent. So from that point, I was able to surmise that basically he could go 12 to 18 days without any sunlight whatsoever, just with the 100-watt solar system he had and those 2 car battery backups. And he goes for a couple days, and then suddenly one evening he plugs in his computer into one of the outlets, and nothing. And he plugs it into another outlet, and nothing. And he plugs it into every outlet he can find in his camper, and still nothing. So he is baffled by this. We thought we had solved this electricity issue, but we find out we hadn't. Did we blow a fuse? We're not sure. So with some research and some troubleshooting, we find out that the outlets are typically, and this makes total sense, are typically 110 volts and not 12 volts. So even though the lights operate on a 12-volt system, the outlets need a 110-volt system. And that's when he remembers that he unplugged the camper from a power source. And so he shows me what this plug looks like. And look at this thing. This thing looks like something you'd plug into an alien spaceship or something. Very bizarre looking thing. I did some research, and really what it is, it's a 30 amp plug. And at a permanent campsite, that's what you would plug it in, and that's what drives your heat, your air conditioning, and all your equipment that draws a lot of juice. And so we figure that we have to devise a system that would support 110, and that involves getting what's called an inverter. And so this here is an inverter. Now it's 750 watts, and what all that means right now is not that important, but that's a lot more power than he needs to just drive charging a computer and his phone and that kind of thing. So Keith at this point is getting a little frustrated with all of this talk of, 12 volts, 110 volts, 100 watts, inverters, converters, DC, AC, all these different electronic terms. And so we decide that I would come out and I would spend 5 days with him. Now, based on our decision, we were going to work on 6 projects in 5 days. So if you know anything about projects and days, we accomplished 3. And we accomplished the 3 most important ones. But while I was there, we were able to establish 2 systems. One was for 110 volts with the inverter, and the other system was a 12-volt system that constantly supplied his bulbs and his fridge. One of the first projects we tackled was what I call, and I'm very excited about, and I was very excited about, is called, we call it the box. And I knew that his batteries, being external, exposed to the elements, would not survive a winter in Vermont with sub-zero temperatures. I just know that from living in Chicago. Our cars struggle when it hits right down to 0. So just sitting out there in the cold would not work. So we kind of came up with this plan to create what we call the box. And so we were going to build it out of 1 sheet of plywood and 3/4 inch plywood. But I went to the store, and 1 sheet of plywood was $54, and I just could not bring myself to spending $54 on a sheet of plywood. So I ended up buying a 1/2 inch sheet of sheathing board. Now, was that a good decision? In the big picture, it wasn't. I should have just bought what I wanted because it would have been better. But this is where we found ourselves, $14 versus $54. It was a good price difference, but long term, it wasn't really that good of a decision. But anyways, so we took this sheet and we created a box. I forget the exact measurements, but we basically cut the lid first, and then we cut 4 identical sides. So one would be at the bottom, then you would have the 2 sides, and then the 4th one we cut in half and we used at the 2. And the lid, like I said, we cut that first because that was going to be bigger than the box because it needed to cover the box. And then we assembled it. We cut some 2x4s, we put those in the corners, and we assembled the whole thing with screws and some metal brackets. And then you can see that we added hinges for the lid. Now to insulate it, we had 1 inch foam board with like a foil covering on it. And so we cut panels out to fill the box in. And you can see here as we put it in the box, just to do all 4 sides. And then the lid as well. We also wrapped it in plastic because it's sheathing board. Sheathing board is not great with water. It absorbs water a little bit like a sponge, and then it crumbles. So nervous about having it in the grass even. We put it on cement pavers. I bought a vinyl tile, and we cut that to kind of put that on the pavers to separate the wood, kind of raise it off the grass and separate it from the really cold cement pavers. And then we put the box on top of that. What we realized after that was that it was exposed to the elements. So we had seen in our research that people had worked on structures using saran wrap, or at least we call it saran wrap. It's kind of a shipping plastic wrap. And so we put 4 stakes in the ground, and we just ran this saran wrap around and around and around, as you can see here. And then we created a lid also that was wrapped in this saran wrap. And so the box was encased in this thing, and it proved to be a pretty good alternative method of just keeping it away from the elements. But as you can see now in the box, we installed our two systems. So you can see the two car batteries here connected in parallel, which means that the positive goes to the positive and the negative goes to the negative. And our one solar panel with 100 watts feeding that system. And then you can see the other two smaller batteries here, and these are called deep cycle batteries. And what that means is that these batteries are designed to be fully charged and then to run fully to empty. Think of it kind of as, your cell phone. You charge it in the night, and then you use it all day, and it goes all the way down, and then you charge it again. Those are called deep cycle batteries. Car batteries are not designed to do that. They're more interested in staying fully charged or real close to it the whole time. So having the two systems we thought was a good idea, and it would separate the two so that his fridge really would never go down. He would always be fully charged. The thing that we noticed as well with the solar panels was that it took about 4 to 6 hours on a sunny day to recharge his batteries from just a normal evening worth of use. One of the things we were worried about with the extreme cold temperature was just that we would have the ability to maintain the batteries without them freezing, because when you hit sub-zero, your batteries are going to freeze. So how are we going to do that? Well, we came up with this idea that if we use these candles that you see here, these are emergency candles that can burn for 115 hours. That's almost 5 days. And so we came up with this little oven idea of putting pavers in there and then putting a paver on top. And as the flame burns, it kind of heats the top paver, and that allows it to radiate some heat. And with the foiled insulation, we thought that at least it would keep the temperature right around freezing. The batteries can survive a little bit before freezing, but we didn't want it to go sub-zero. So we created this little oven thing, and we tested it. So you can see us here, we light it, and then we closed the lid. We left it, shut for 5 minutes. We reopened it, and you could feel the difference inside. I mean, just with our hands, we could feel that there was some heat generated. So we were hoping that on the extreme end of the cold, that Keith could come out and use this to just keep his batteries alive if he needed to. So with the box finished, we were ready to install our two systems. So we did install them, the two car batteries supplying our 12-volt system, and then the two deep cycle batteries supplying our 110-volt system. Now, a 110-volt system needs an inverter, and so as we saw earlier, this is the 750-watt inverter, which only costs about $80 and is by far more powerful than anything he needs. But the reason you need an inverter is because you cannot store 110 alternating current voltage. You can only store a direct current, and that's where it gets a little bit complicated, but you store 12 volts and then you have to convert it or invert it up to 110, and that takes energy. So you can't leave your inverter on at all times. You turn it on when you want it and you turn it off after you used it, or else it will eat up all of your battery power. Then, as you can see here, we had to buy an adapter to convert that very bizarre looking 30 amp plug down to just a normal 3-prong Edison plug, and you can see that here. We also wrapped them in electrical tape because they're going to sit outside in the grass, and in the winter we didn't want to have any shorts or any problems with the water hitting the electricity. So we wrapped it that, then we put an extension cord on it and ran that through the only access point we had to the box, which is in this upper corner, and then you can see we plugged it into the inverter. Now, we did do a stress test on the 110-volt system as well. We drained everything we could during the day, and then at night at 6 p.m. we plugged everything that we had that needed 110 volts into the system, which means we plugged in, I think it was 2 laptops, it was 1 tablet, it was a Bluetooth speaker, a Razor, and 2 phones. And it took about, I'd say maybe 4 or 5 hours to absolutely charge everything all the way up to full. And then the next day, it took about 4 to 6 hours for the 2 solar panels that we had for the 110 system to fully recharge those deep cycle batteries. Now for this system, we did use 2 solar panels, 100 watt per panel, just because we thought we would need the extra juice to recharge that after we used it. So in summary, we were able to set up 2 systems on solar power, and we were able to store the batteries in a weather protected box. So we felt pretty good about our accomplishment on this side. Now what we ended up doing was moving all of these solar panels to the top of his camper instead of leaving them down in the grass. We just felt that it would be better access to the sun without anything getting in its way. So you can see here we have his original 100 watt system. We have it separated in 2, and then we have 2 separate 100 watt panels. So as really an afterthought, we realized that we didn't really want the panels to be able to be flown off should the wind pick up and blow them off of the top of the camper. So we came up with this idea of just putting 2x4s on the legs. As you can see here, we just strapped them with some screws and some metal straps. And then we put 100-pound sandbags on them. Now, the reason why we put 100-pound sandbags on them is because we couldn't find 50-pound bags. So we used 100-pound, and let me tell you, when that sand gets wet, easily 150, if not more, pounds of weight on that. So we felt it was stable. It was up from the ground, away from any interference whatsoever, and aimed at the sun in a way that we thought that we could capture as much of the sunlight throughout the day that was available. So we have our 2 systems. We have the 12-volt system with the 2 car batteries. We have the 110 alternating current system with the 2 deep cycle batteries and the inverter that you do turn on and off when you need it. And the system recharge based on the sun in October was about 4 or 5 hours. So we felt that that was a safe amount of time, that going through the winter that should be sufficient enough for him to be able to recharge the batteries as he went along. So there you have it. We have electricity. We feel comfortable and prepared, and most importantly, Keith feels comfortable and prepared that he can go through the winter and have 2 systems that are going to work and that are going to survive the cold. So join us on our next videos as we install a composting toilet and a wood-burning stove inside his camper. And until then, I hope your life is a great adventure.